By the time the second tray of champagne floated past the foyer, I was standing in my own front hall at 41 years old, staring at a cream place card that said, Naomi Mercer, family friend. My husband had left me 8 months earlier for a woman with old money posture and a last name that opened doors, and now he was celebrating their engagement in the house everyone said he had taken from me. They had set the table with my wedding china. My mother-in-law smiled at me like she was offering mercy and said, "We thought guest sounded kinder. There are insults you feel in your throat before you understand them in your mind." And that was one of them. But tucked inside my navy leather tote was a blue closing folder, a lender payment history, a recorded deed, and the kind of truth that can empty a polished room faster than fire. If you like your stories where a family's carefully lit image cracks under one hard fact, stay with me, because I did not walk into that house to reclaim anybody's affection. I walked in to correct the record. The event was the kind of thing people in our town called intimate when it still required valet parking, customs menu cards, and a florist who wore all black and looked offended by pollen. Our house sat on Briar Glen Road in Short Hills, New Jersey, on a crescent lined with maples and broad porches and quiet competition. That night, the front walk had been lined with hurricane lanterns. The hydrangeas I had planted were uplit in soft amber. Someone had tied ivory ribbon around the brass railings on the steps. Even before I got inside, I could hear the string trio in the living room. Bach, of course. Respectable people always think Bach makes them look innocent. The invitation had come on thick cream stock with beveled gold edges. Celeste Harrow and Adrian Mercer request the pleasure of your company for an intimate spring supper celebrating their engagement and the restoration of their home. Their home. Restoration. I must have read that line 20 times the first night it arrived. Not because it hurt, although it did. Not because it was cruel, although it was. But because it was strategic. Every word in that sentence had been chosen to make a lie look established. At the bottom of the card, beneath the date and the cocktail hour and the line about formal evening attire, there had been one handwritten addition in Adrian's neat slanted script. "I hope you'll come. Let's keep this graceful." That was his family's phrase, their family motto, their sedative, their weapon. When his mother wanted me to swallow a slight at Christmas, she said it. When his sister forgot to include me in a vacation plan that I had helped fund the year before, she said it. When Adrian came home late smelling of someone else's perfume and told me I was overreacting to timing, he said it too. "Let's keep this graceful." What they meant was, absorb this quietly so no one has to look at what we're doing. The woman he left me for, Celeste Harrow, was standing near the piano when I arrived, one hand resting lightly over the stem of a champagne coupe, as if glassware were another thing that belonged to her by birthright. She wore dove gray silk with a square neckline and diamond studs so small and expensive they looked like part of her skin. Her hair was tucked into a low knot. She didn't look triumphant. That would have been cruder than her style allowed. She looked curated. "Naomi," she said, with just enough softness to imply generosity in front of witnesses, "I'm so glad you came." People always admire a rich woman for being calm in situations she helped create. Adrian appeared a second later with the expression I had once mistaken for steadiness and now understood was simply rehearsal. At 44, he was still handsome in the exact way that gets mistaken for character in rooms where most people don't listen closely enough. Dark suit, pale tie, cuff links I'd bought him for our 10th anniversary. He kissed the air beside my cheek, not my skin. "Thank you." He's really. This means a lot. To him, I knew. My presence meant legitimacy, proof of modern civility, evidence that he had not destroyed anything, only upgraded. I glanced at the side table where my place card waited beside a folded napkin ring engraved with an M not for Mercer. For the custom China monogram I'd chosen 12 years earlier when we got married in late September, and I still thought permanence was something you built from patience. On the table, between a low arrangement of white peonies and ranunculus, sat 3 silver-framed photographs. One was of Celeste and Adrian on a ski slope in matching sunglasses. One was of the house at twilight. and one was a black and white picture of the front door, half open, with the brass key visible in the lock. That key had been mine, not metaphorically. Literally. When we bought the house in May of 2018, the closing attorney handed me the original brass key on a navy ribbon because I had asked the locksmith not to attach one of those ugly plastic tags. I still remember the weight of it in my palm. The ribbon looped through the bow. Adrian had laughed and said, "Only you would make a key elegant." Then he kissed my forehead in the parking lot and told me we'd grow old there. I had another copy of that key in my tote that night. Same brass, same ribbon, worn at the edges where my thumb had rubbed it during too many waiting rooms, too many legal meetings, too many sleepless nights when I needed something solid to hold. A waiter offered me champagne. I took sparkling water instead. I wanted a clear head. Adrian's sister, Brooke, drifted over in a pale green dress and did the kind of half-embrace women use when they want credit for warmth without the burden of contact. "You look lovely," she said, "and thank you for being so mature about all of this. Honestly, it means everything to Mom that we keep this graceful." There it was again. The ribbon they liked to tie around knives. I smiled. I wore dark colors so no one would mistake me for a centerpiece. She laughed too hard, relieved to interpret that as compliance. If you had asked anyone in that room what I was like before all this, most of them would have said some version of the same thing. Quiet, competent, sweet. The woman who remembered birthdays, mailed sympathy cards, kept spreadsheets for school fundraisers, and never made anyone uncomfortable. I worked as the business office manager at a private girls' school in Summit. I knew payroll systems, benefit deductions, tuition schedules, audit prep, grant disbursement timelines. I knew how to trace a discrepancy to its source without theatrics. I knew how to read where money had actually been, which is not the same thing as listening to where people said it had gone. What most people did not know, because Adrian had spent years ensuring they wouldn't, was that our life looked more glamorous from the street than it felt from the inside. He liked good lighting, good bourbon, good introductions, and the kind of restaurants that served tiny portions with long explanations. He also liked being admired for providing things he had not fully provided. When we married, he was in luxury kitchen sales. Later, he moved into brand consulting for a home design firm in Manhattan, which sounded more impressive than it paid at first. He was charming in client meetings, intuitive with aspiration, excellent at making other people's houses feel like statements about themselves. He understood how to sell a room by describing the life that would happen inside it. That talent made people assume he was good with substance, too. He wasn't. He was good with framing. The house on Briar Glen had cost $782,000 in 2018. I know because I can still recite the numbers from memory the way some people recite hymns. I put down $146, thousand from my grandmother's estate and another $22,500 from savings I had built during 7 years of doing payroll and living below our means while Adrian's income floated. He contributed $31,000, most of it from a year-end bonus. I was proud of both of us then. That's the humiliating part people don't talk about enough, not that you were fooled. That you participated sincerely. The kitchen island everyone complimented that night? I paid the contractor's final invoice. The slate roof repair after the 2020 storm? From my emergency fund. The library built-in Celeste was using as a backdrop for her engagement photographs. I spent 6 months comparing bids because Adrian said his commissions were delayed again, and we couldn't be reckless. Whenever I raised the imbalance, he kissed the top of my head and said, "You're better with structure, Naomi. I'm better at growth. We're a team. Teams, I learned, can have one person doing the carrying and another doing the announcing." I didn't meet Celeste Harrow until the beginning of the end, although I had heard about her long before I knew I should remember her name. She was on the board of a literacy charity Adrian's firm sponsored. Her family had money from commercial real estate and private equity, the kind of layered money that arrives with foundations and surnames etched onto museum walls. She had been divorced 2 years, no children, elegant in a clean, almost architectural way. The first time Adrian mentioned her, it was because she understood branding and had connected him with two potential clients. The second time he mentioned her, he used the phrase legacy families. The third time, he came home smelling faintly of an expensive cedar perfume I did not own, and told me, without looking up from his phone, that some women just knew how to move through high-level rooms without over-explaining themselves. That was the first red flag I did not permit myself to call by its name. It's strange, the things women are trained to rationalize. He's tired. He's insecure. He didn't mean it like that. He's under pressure. He wants more than he has. Help him. Smooth it over. Don't make yourself hard. The first smaller betrayal I can identify clearly happened 3 months before he left. We were at a fundraising dinner for my school, and I saw him across the room introducing Celeste to a couple I had known for years. I walked up smiling, and Adrian said, "Oh, good, Naomi, you found us," in the tone of a man whose coat check ticket had turned up. Then he introduced me by my first name only. Not my wife, not this is Naomi, just Naomi, as if I were a consultant who had wandered over to discuss floral costs. Celeste shook my hand and said, "I've heard you're wonderfully practical." Wonderfully practical. I can still hear it. The compliment that was actually a filing decision. Another small betrayal came 2 weeks later when Adrian changed the guest count for our anniversary dinner without telling me and brought Celeste's name up 3 times over dessert because she had a naturally instinctive eye. He looked embarrassed when he realized what he was doing, but not embarrassed enough to stop. Then came the deleted group message. His mother had created a family planning thread for his father's 70th birthday dinner. I helped book the private room at a restaurant in Chatham because I knew the general manager from school events. 3 days before the dinner, Brooke accidentally replied to me in a separate thread with a screenshot of the main family chat. My name wasn't on it, neither was my husband's explanation. No one had technically forgotten me. They had removed me. When I asked Adrian, he sighed like I was making bookkeeping harder than it needed to be. "It was just easier," he said. "They didn't want any awkwardness." Awkwardness, another family word for your rightful presence. Then there was the morning I opened our security app and realized I had been removed as a primary user. Not from the mortgage, not from the utility account, not from the tax portal, just from the app that controlled the doors. I asked him about that too. He told me he had been streamlining access. By then, the affair itself almost felt less shocking than the contempt of the administration around it. He left officially on a Thursday in October. I remember the date because I had a dental cleaning at 8 and a faculty budget meeting at 11, and because ordinary details become anchors when a life tilts. October 12th. He came home early, stood in the kitchen with one hand on the back of a bar stool, and told me he had outgrown the emotional architecture of our marriage. That phrase was so embarrassingly borrowed from his own industry that for a second I almost laughed. Then he said her name. Sally Lest. He said he hadn't planned for it. He said she challenged him. He said he finally felt seen by someone who understood the scale of his ambitions. He said what we had become was respectful but flat. He said he needed a partner who fit the rooms he wanted to enter. I looked at him for a long time and asked, "Did you rehearse that in the car?" He stared at me with a hurt expression that, in hindsight, was probably just irritation that I had not delivered the emotional collapse he was prepared to manage. What I did instead was walk upstairs, take the brass key off my dresser, sit on the edge of the bed, and hold it until the shaking passed. People like Adrian always believe they're leaving because they're evolving. It rarely occurs to them that they're mostly just revealing what they value under pressure. For the first 2 weeks after he left, he stayed at the South Orange Hotel to give me space, which sounds almost noble until you know that he was still charging groceries to our joint card and texting me photographs of mail I needed to sort. Then, when the divorce conversation became real and expensive, he floated a proposal in the tone of someone offering compromise. He would stay in the house temporarily. It made sense, he said, because his commute was easier from there, because the housing market was unpredictable. Because I spent so many evenings with my mother anyway after her second knee replacement, and because, in his words, "You've always been more adaptable than me." That line was not a compliment, it was an extraction strategy. By then, I was sleeping badly, dropping weight, and trying to function at work without telling 16-year-olds who forgot tuition deadlines that their timing wasn't actually the worst thing I'd heard all week. My mother was in Madison recovering from surgery. Driving there every other night already felt like another life layered on top of mine. So when my attorney, Marisol Vega, said a short-term occupancy agreement might preserve calm while we sorted title and support, I said yes. Marisol was the first person who looked at the whole situation and did not confuse my composure with uncertainty. She was compact, immaculate, impossible to rush, and had a way of letting silence make people reveal more than they meant to. In our first meeting, when I slid the refinance packet across her conference table, she paused on page 4 and tapped the signature line with one manicured nail. "He signed a quitclaim deed?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "And the refinance note is solely in your name?" "Yes." "And the monthly mortgage auto drafts from your personal checking?" "Yes." She sat back and gave me a look I would later come to treasure, because it meant the truth was stronger than the performance. "Then your husband may be telling a social story," she said. "He is not telling a legal one." The refinance had happened in August of 2022, 2 years before he left. Adrian had overextended himself on a speculative investment with a college friend who wanted to flip a mixed-use property in Newark. The project stalled, the carrying costs ballooned, and an old tax issue he'd been managing surfaced in a way that threatened to attach judgments to anything still in his name. Rates were climbing, our existing mortgage needed restructuring, and the cleanest way to protect the house was to refinance with me as sole borrower and, on Marisol's then-colleague's advice, place title in my name alone. I remember the closing very clearly. The room smelled like toner and stale coffee. Adrian was agitated because he'd been on calls all morning. He signed where he was told to sign. The quitclaim deed transferred his interest in the property to me. It was recorded with the county clerk 11 days later. The new 30-year fixed mortgage was $538 at 5.14%, monthly payment with escrow, $3,842.18. Adrian called it temporary pay paper. I called it what it was: protection. At the time, I had been protecting us, or what I thought was us. He promised he would reimburse half the mortgage every month once his account stabilized. Sometimes he sent money, usually not the full amount, often late. Occasionally with captions like "crushing it this month, baby," just waiting on one wire. There were screenshots, transfers for $900, $1,400, once $600, and a promise to true up later. Later never truly arrives for people who survive by narrating themselves more generously than the numbers allow. After the separation, the occupancy agreement Marisol drafted gave him until June 30th to remain in the house, provided he paid a set monthly use and occupancy amount, covered utilities, made no structural changes, and hosted no event with more than 12 non-family guests without my written consent. He signed that too. Because people like Adrian sign things when they still believe the person across from them is too heartbroken to enforce them. He was wrong about that. He was just right about one thing first. I was heartbroken. There's a humiliating practicality to heartbreak after 40. You still have payroll to approve. You still have prescriptions to pick up for your mother. You still need to answer an 8th-grade parent email about lunch billing while your husband is playing second adolescence with a woman who says words like curation and legacy with a straight face. I moved into a furnished apartment on Walnut Street in Maplewood in November. 1 bedroom, radiator heat, decent light, terrible closet space. I told almost no one it was temporary because I could not bear the pitying choreography that follows those disclosures. Adrian told everyone else something different. He said the separation had been mutual. He said the house arrangement was sensible. Then, more aggressively as winter turned to spring, he began telling people he had kept the house because Naomi didn't want the burden. I heard that version 3 different ways before Christmas. From a woman at church who squeezed my forearm two arm too long and said, "At least you don't have to worry about property stress." From Brooke, who casually mentioned that Adrian was being generous about letting me take furniture. And from Adrian's mother, Paula, who leaned close at a holiday luncheon and whispered, "I know this isn't how you imagined things, but it's better not to cling to a house you can't manage alone." I remember setting down my fork very carefully and asking, "Who told you I can't manage it?" She blinked and smiled the way women do when they realize they may have overplayed condescension. "Oh, darling, no one said that exactly. Let's just keep this graceful." I think that was the moment something changed in me. Not because it was the cruelest thing anyone had said. It wasn't. But because it made the mechanism so clear. Adrian wasn't just leaving, he was redistributing authorship. He was editing me out of the narrative of the life I had financed. If he had simply had an affair and left, there would still have been enough pain to remake me. But he wanted more than departure. He wanted ownership of the story. He wanted to be the one who advanced while I became a soft shadow in the background, the practical first wife who couldn't stretch to his future. He wanted the social credit of survival without the cost of honesty. And because Celeste had money, and because her family had more, and because wealthy people are often more comfortable with a smooth lie than a messy truth, they were ready to help him stage it. The first hint that the staging had become formal came in February when our former event planner, Deirdre Fallon, accidentally emailed me a floral proposal meant for Celeste. Subject line: Mercer House Supper. Inside were peony counts, taper candle measurements, and a note about repositioning the ex-wife's portrait wall in the upstairs hall. There was no ex-wife portrait wall. There was a hallway where I had spent 9 years hanging family photographs and black and white prints I had inherited from my grandmother. I stared at the screen for a full minute, then forwarded the email to Marisol. Her reply came 2 minutes later: "Save everything." That became our rhythm. Save everything. The invoice for custom linens, the quote for valet service, the text from Adrian asking whether I still had the silverfish servers from our wedding registry because Mom thought they'd be useful for a dinner. The screenshot of Celeste tagging the house exterior on a private social account with a white heart and the caption "Home feels good on me." The accidental carbon copy from a photographer discussing light near the library windows for ring shots. Each item was small, petty even on its own. Together, they formed structure.
Then Adrian's attorney escalated.
In early March, I received a proposed settlement memo that included one sentence so bald I had to reread it twice to make sure I was not misinterpreting it. Husband has continued to carry substantially all household expenses associated with the marital residence post-separation and seeks equitable recognition of same in any final property distribution. I read it out loud in Marisol's office because hearing absurdity helps define it. "Substantially all," she repeated, expressionless. I nodded. She opened her laptop, logged into the lender portal with the credentials I had always maintained, and pulled the full mortgage history. Every payment since October had been auto-drafted from my Wells Fargo account, ending in 4421. On time, exact, traceable. Not one had originated from Adrian, not one. The escrow shortage payment in January, also mine. Homeowner's insurance renewal, mine. Property tax disbursement through the mortgage escrow I funded. His occupancy transfers, covered utilities sporadically and never on schedule, and even those were incomplete. Marisol requested a certified payment history from the lender and a fresh title search. When the documents arrived a week later, clipped and tabbed, the story they told was almost insultingly plain. Title, solely mine. Note, solely mine. Payment source, mine. Occupancy agreement, signed by Adrian Limited, conditional, temporary. And that's when I realized this hadn't been planned in a week. It had been building for months. Not the affair alone, not even the emotional drift. The administrative erasure, the removed security access, the family chat exclusion, the shifted guest net narratives, the settlement language, the engagement dinner invitation calling it their home. He hadn't just fallen in love with a richer woman and become arrogant. He had been laying down a public record to compete with the legal one. He thought, if enough people repeated the lie, I would fold to avoid becoming impolite. He thought the woman he had spent years training to absorb discomfort would do it one last time. What neither he nor Celeste understood was that I had spent my entire adult life with budgets, audits, grant restrictions, escrow schedules, payroll variance reports, and families who swore they had paid tuition when the ledger clearly disagreed. I knew what happens when a person bets their future on the idea that no one will ever check. By mid-March, the event plans had sharpened. It would not just be an engagement dinner. It would be an engagement dinner with strategic spectators, Celeste's parents, two trustees from her family's foundation, Adrian's boss and his wife, a local magazine photographer for private use, which is what people say when they want the option of public admiration later. There would be 34 guests, 34 in direct breach of the occupancy agreement. Deirdre's seating chart, which she accidentally shared via a vendor portal still tied to my email, had me at table B, near the French doors, between Adrian's aunt and a dentist from Milburn, who once asked me if I planned to do anything creative now that I was married. My name again was listed without status. No Mrs. No family role, just Naomi. Adrian called 3 nights before the event. I know this is unusual, he said, which is a sentence men use when they intend to normalize disrespect by naming it mildly, but your coming would really help settle everyone. Everyone. I repeated. You know what I mean. No, I said. I actually don't. He exhaled. Celeste's parents are traditional in a very old-fashioned way. It would reassure them that there's no animosity. I leaned back in my kitchen chair and looked at the brass key on the table beside my tea mug. So my presence is for underwriting. He paused, then carefully. Naomi, don't do that. Do what? Turn everything into an accounting exercise. I almost admired the confidence it took to say that to the woman whose name was on the mortgage he was pretending to own. Instead, I asked, Are you still planning to use the fish servers? Silence. Then, Brooke told you. No, I said. The emails did. He grew very quiet after that, and for a second I wondered if he understood how porous his performance had become. But then he did what he always did when cornered by facts. He pivoted into tone management. Let's keep this graceful, he said. I smiled into the phone, though he couldn't see it. Of course, the day of the dinner I left work early, went home, and stood in front of my closet longer than the decision deserved. Not because I wanted to impress anyone. I was done with wanting the right audience to finally understand my value. But clothing is language in rooms built on hierarchy, and I had no intention of arriving dressed like a plea. I chose a navy silk crepe dress with long sleeves, simple lines, no apology. Gold earrings my mother had given me on my 40th birthday. Nude heels low enough that I could stand comfortably if this took time. I pulled my hair into a clean knot and put on the kind of makeup that made me look awake, not armored. Then I took the blue closing folder from my desk drawer and checked the tabs one more time. Tab 1. Purchase closing statement from May 21, 2018, showing the down payment wire from my grandmother's estate distribution and my personal savings. Tab 2. Recorded quitclaim deed dated August 16, 2022, transferring all of Adrian's interest in the property to me. Tab 3. Refinance note and mortgage summary showing me as sole borrower. Tab 4. Certified lender payment history from October through April, each monthly payment drafted from my account. Tab 5. Occupancy agreement with the guest limit clause highlighted. Tab 6. Text messages from Adrian promising reimbursement and acknowledging the house was technically yours on paper. Tab 7. Proposed settlement language from his attorney, claiming he had carried substantially all housing costs. Marisol had added one more document that afternoon. A notice of material breach prepared for delivery if the event exceeded the agreed occupancy terms, included outside press, or represented ownership falsely in a manner affecting settlement posture. Her phrase, not mine. She had also arranged for a property manager she trusted to be available Monday morning for a documented walkthrough if Adrian forced the issue. You do not have to make a speech, she told me over the phone before I left. You only have to refuse the lie at the point where it's being monetized. That was why I went, not to win him back, not to shame Celeste for existing, not even, if I'm honest, to exact revenge in the dramatic sense. I went because the lie had reached a point where it was being used to establish value. Social value, marital value, financial value, legal value, and if I let that happen in silence, I would spend the next year fighting not just a man but a myth. When I walked into the house and saw what they had done to it, some primitive grief still hit me. The foyer runner I chose in Lisbon had been replaced with something cream and anonymous. The hydrangea blue cushions from the library window seat were gone. My grandmother's oil portrait in the dining room had been removed entirely, and in its place hung an oversized mirror reflecting candlelight and people I no longer trusted. The living room smelled of peonies and expensive catering butter. My wedding china sat beneath new crystal glasses, as if history could be sterilized by stemware. The symbolic cruelty of that nearly got me. Not because dishes matter more than vows, but because objects remember when people decide not to. I had unwrapped each of those plates after our wedding, hand washing them the first time, because I was irrationally afraid the gold rim would dull. Adrian used to tease me for that. They're dishes, Naomi, not crown jewels. And yet there they were, lining the table for his second act. I found my assigned seat, placed my tote against the chair leg, and sat. From there, I could see nearly the whole room. Celeste's mother, Marianne Harrow, had the expression of a woman determined to enjoy herself among tasteful surroundings. Her pearl earrings were almost comically perfect. Her husband, Malcolm, stood near the fireplace speaking with Adrian in the posture of men assessing one another's usefulness. Paula floated between clusters of guests in sea green silk, playing dignified matriarch. Brooke filmed short, vertical clips of the candles and floral centerpieces, probably for a private story she would later insist wasn't meant to hurt anyone. The public humiliation began in earnest with the first toast before dinner. Paula tapped her glass and thanked everyone for coming together in such a loving, evolved way. She spoke about second chances and courage and how proud she was of Adrian for rebuilding his life with integrity and beauty. She then looked directly at me and said, "And we're deeply grateful to Naomi for her grace through this transition." Half the room turned to glance at me in that terrible collective way people do when they think they are witnessing maturity, but are really participating in coercion. I raised my water glass slightly, not enough to affirm. Enough to survive. Then came the next cut, when the appetizers were served: mini crab cakes, burrata crostini, asparagus tartlets. Deirdre the planner approached my chair with a tight smile and whispered, "One quick thing. The photographer wants a wider frame for the couple after dessert, so we may need guests to shift slightly from the center line. If you wouldn't mind moving toward the window, then that would be wonderful." Toward the window. Out of the central image, I looked up at her and said softly, "You're asking me to step further out of my own house for a cleaner picture." The blood drained from her face. No, not like that. I just meant, "I know what you meant," I said. "You should go." She left without another word. I wish I could tell you I felt powerful in that moment. I didn't. I felt blistered. There is a difference. Power came later. In that moment, I was still a woman, sitting 6 feet from the man who had dismantled our marriage and replaced the evidence with florals. During the first course, Adrian behaved as if we were all starring in a tasteful streaming drama about modern decency. He checked on guests, refilled champagne, touched Celeste's shoulder in practiced intervals, and avoided looking at me for more than half a second. Celeste talked about preservation architecture and charitable literacy work, and the joy of restoring a house for the next chapter. She said that phrase twice, maybe 3 times. The next chapter, as if the last one had simply expired rather than been looted. At one point, I heard Malcolm Harrow say to Adrian, "A man who can hold onto a home through transition tells me something about his steadiness." That was the sentence. Not because it was the first lie I'd heard that evening, but because it located the lie where it was intended to do business. I put down my fork. Adrian smiled modestly and began to answer. "It hasn't been easy, but sometimes you realize what matters and you fight for it. Fight for it. With my mortgage, with my deed, with my tax payments. Something inside me became very still. There's a kind of calm that is not peace but alignment, facts lining up behind your spine. I reached into my tote and touched the brass key first. Then the folder dinner moved on, a beat with pistachio dust, then sea bass. The string trio had packed up and a playlist of low piano standards filtered through hidden speakers. Candles had burned lower. Wine had warmed faces. People were comfortable enough now to believe the story they had dressed for. That is always the best moment to end a performance. Dessert had just been set. Individual lemon tarts with sugared violets. When Adrian rose with his glass, Celeste looked up at him with the attentive expression women learn when they know they're being watched. He thanked everyone for coming. He thanked Celeste for bringing light and steadiness into a difficult season. He thanked his parents for their love. Then he put one hand on the back of her chair and said, "And thank you to everyone who helped make this house feel like home again." The room responded exactly as such rooms do. Soft applause, smiles, a few knowing glances between women who love a redemption narrative as long as it served on porcelain. I stood before the applause finished. It wasn't dramatic. That was important. I didn't scrape my chair. I didn't raise my voice. I simply rose, picked up my water glass, and said, "Before we toast the house, there's one correction I need to make." The room went so quiet I could hear silver-touched china. Adrian froze. Celeste's smile held for 1 second too long, then faded. I kept my eyes on Malcolm first because he was the one who had attached value to the lie in public. "Mr. Harrow," I said, "a moment ago, you complimented Adrian for holding on to this home through transition. I understand why you believed that. It's a flattering version of events. It just isn't the true one." Adrian set down his glass. "Naomi." I turned my head and looked at him directly. "No, you've had the microphone for months." Then I opened the blue folder. I did not flourish it. I laid it on the table the way I would lay out tuition records for a parent insisting their child had been billed in error. "This house was purchased on May 21st, 2018, I said. "The down payment was funded primarily by my grandmother's estate distribution and my savings. In August of 2022, when Adrian's business issues jeopardized the property, he signed a quitclaim deed transferring his ownership interest to me so the refinance could close in my name alone. The recorded deed is here." I slid the first document toward Malcolm. Celeste's father took it almost automatically, the way men who have spent their lives around contracts take paper. He glanced down, saw the county recording stamp, and his expression changed. Adrian stepped toward me. "This is not the time." I looked at him and said the quiet line I had been carrying for weeks. "You mistook my silence for permission." "No one moved," I continued. "The mortgage note has been solely in my name since that refinance. The monthly payments, including escrow for taxes and insurance, have been drafted from my account every month since our separation. The certified lender history is tabbed in blue. So no, Adrian did not keep this house. He occupied it temporarily under a signed agreement while I paid for it." Celeste inhaled sharply. It was the first real sound she had made all evening. Marian Harrow put down her fork. "Surely this is a technicality." I turned to her. "A deed is not a feeling, Mrs. Harrow." She went pale. Adrian's face had gone from pink to gray in a way I had never seen before. He tried to smile, which made it worse. "Naomi, we discussed all of this. The title arrangement was temporary. This is unbelievably inappropriate. Temporary things don't get recorded with the county clerk unless someone wants them to count," I said. Then I slid the next document toward Malcolm. Tab 4 is the lender payment history. Every mortgage payment since October came from my checking account ending 4421. If anyone at this table has been told Adrian has been carrying substantially all housing costs, that statement is false. Brooke whispered, "Oh my God," like a teenager who had opened the wrong door. Celeste looked from the papers to Adrian and back again. "You told me you bought her out." There it was. The sentence that explained the confidence. He had not just lied socially. He had lied romantically, too. He held up both hands. Celeste, I was in the middle of finalizing terms. Naomi is twisting timing in two. I took out tab 7 and placed it on top of the others. That's a screenshot of the settlement memo your attorney sent in March claiming you carried substantially all household expenses. If anyone is twisting, it isn't me. Malcolm's jaw tightened as he scanned the pages. He was not a warm man, from what little I knew, but he was clearly a man who despised being made to look uninformed in public. In another context, I might have felt sorry for Celeste. She had humiliated me, yes, but I could see, almost in real time, the social math rearranging behind her eyes. She had not expected to be the less informed woman in the room. Paula stood so quickly her chair legs squealed. Naomi, please. Let's not do this here. I folded my hands lightly in front of me. You all chose here, then came the part that made the room turn from shocked to damaged. The occupancy agreement Adrian signed permits temporary residence only under specific conditions, I said. One of those conditions is no event of more than 12 non-family guests without my written consent. Another is no use of the property in a way that misrepresents ownership in connection with pending settlement discussions. There are 34 guests here, a photographer in the library, and an invitation calling this your home. My attorney has already been notified that the breach occurred. Adrian stared at me. You can't be serious. I'm very serious. I saw Deirdre, the planner, near the butler's pantry, go motionless with her phone in her hand. Celeste spoke then, but not to me. To Adrian, quietly. Is there a photographer? He didn't answer fast enough. That told her everything. I'm going to be even clearer, I said. Because clarity is its own form of mercy when everyone else is committed to fog. I did not come here to embarrass anyone. I came because you invited me to sit through a public lie in the house I have continued to pay for while being treated like a decorative witness to my own erasure. That ends tonight. It is amazing how quickly wealth loses its manners when paperwork enters the room. Marian demanded to know why Celeste had not been told. Brooke started crying, which irritated me more than if she had shouted. Paula kept repeating my name in the tone people use with frightened horses. Two of Adrian's colleagues suddenly developed urgent interest in their phones. Someone from the catering staff quietly stopped pouring wine, and Malcolm Harrow, after reading every page with the alarming focus of a man reviewing exposure, looked up at Adrian and asked, "Did you represent this property as yours?" No one will ever convince me that simple questions aren't sometimes the most devastating weapons in the world. Adrian's mouth opened, closed, opened again. It's complicated, he said. Malcolm set the papers down with surgical precision. No, it's documented. Celeste stood up then, not dramatically. No flung napkin, no slap. She simply rose and took one step back from Adrian, as if physical distance might restore the dignity that information had just stripped from her. You said the refinance was basically procedural, she said. You said she wanted out. You said the house was settled. Adrian's eyes darted toward me, then toward his mother, then back to Celeste. It was going to be settled. Naomi is doing this because she can't let go. That actually made me laugh. Not a loud laugh. Worse. A small, involuntary one that came from the center of my body like a door unlatching. Let go, I said. Adrian, I have been paying the mortgage on the house where you're hosting your upgrade party. He hissed my name under his breath. I held his gaze. The bank never fell in love with you. It just kept taking my payment. I didn't plan that line. It arrived on its own. Maybe because truth, when it has been suppressed too long, often comes out clean. The room shifted then, palpably. People who had been willing to enjoy the evening as tasteful complexity now had to decide whether they were comfortable standing inside fraud-adjacent theater. Respectable people hate that choice because it exposes how often they rely on performance to avoid moral labor. Adrian moved toward me, lower voice now, trying to convert the scene into a private management problem. Can we speak in the study? No, Naomi. No, I repeated. You were comfortable with a public fiction. You can be comfortable with a public correction. There was the photographer, just visible through the library doorway, holding a camera at his side like contraband. Celeste saw him too, and turned white. Who hired him? She asked. Deirdre, poor fool, answered automatically. He was included with the package. For 1 second, I thought Marianne Harrow might actually faint, not from morality. From optics, Adrian tried one more tactic. Even if all of this is technically true, airing it like this is cruel. That was when I understood, finally and fully, the scale of his delusion. He truly believed timing defined morality more than conduct did. He believed revelation was harsher than deception if revelation disrupted his arrangement. I said very quietly, Cruel was inviting me to watch you toast yourself with my mortgage. Nobody spoke after that. Malcolm stood, gathered the papers, and addressed his daughter with the restrained fury of a man educated never to shout in front of staff. Celeste, get your coat. She didn't move. He softened, barely. Now, Marianne followed, not before giving Adrian a look so cold it felt almost ancestral.